Thank you very much. First, I'd like to express my gratitude to all of you for making time to come, and to the Sussex University for organizing this, and to the network also for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts on this very important issue. So I'm going to be looking at the topic there, transitions to low carbon energy systems, which pathways for energy access for all, if that will ever happen. So I'm going to be examining the extent to which low carbon development can simultaneously address concerns around increasing energy access, reducing poverty, and also improving human development and economic growth. To do that, I'll look at three different themes. One is the development benefits of low carbon energy systems. From the evidence so far gathered, largely through the IPCC's SREN report, the Sustainable Renewable Energy report, which I was part of, and also the low carbon, looking at low carbon energy technology transfer, its relationships with sustainable development and poverty reduction. Basically, the current technology transfer systems and models we have, how effective is it in actually ensuring increasing access to energy to those who really need access, the poor and the marginalized, not only in developing countries, but also in developed countries. Increasingly, we're finding poverty and lack of access to basic resources in many countries. And also briefly touch at the financing sustainable energy for all. What is working currently, basically looking again at the current mechanisms for financing energy access, largely through the climate finance options, and then see how, from my perspectives and also perspectives of the researchers, I've read their books and their papers on how this is working and what we may, as this network, push towards changing. So before I go into low carbon energy systems directly, I was sharing this while I was coming here with my son, who is in primary school, and he said, is it different from low carbon development? What is low carbon energy access? And there are so many acronyms that we have unwittingly come up with, sorry to say that, in this field of green energy, low carbon energy, clean energy, and people keep getting confused as to what are we really talking about. So for me, I think about this starting from a low carbon development pathway in the first instance, to reduce carbon dioxide emissions while ensuring economic growth. And this is the key imperative for trying to build a low carbon energy system. How can we utilize less carbon to promote economic growth? And also substitute fossil fuels with low carbon energy while promoting economic growth and human welfare. In all the discussions, we find that improving energy efficiency, even of the high carbon fossil fuel systems, are also parts of the whole system. So the key goal is to build a low carbon economy, an economic growth pathway which attains sustainable development through technological innovations, and these are the key words for me that I have highlighted there in bold: technological innovations, systems innovations, and industrial transformation. And this must be heading towards development of sustainable energy options, and also policy interventions that reduce the consumption of carbon energy and reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases, with a specific focus on carbon dioxide emissions. And this is from one Chinese researcher. So from this whole thinking, for me, a low carbon energy system is one that is trying to mainstream energy efficiency in the way that energy is used, and also upscale low carbon energy technologies and innovations within the system, and by so doing, decouple carbon dioxide emissions from GDP growth and the associated energy use. So having this background, what then are the benefits of low carbon energy systems? One, the first and foremost of what has brought this to the fore is mitigation of greenhouse gases. Because climate change impacts on key sectors of every economy, both developing and developing countries, are now compelling from all the IPCC reports, the science we have so far. And energy is at the center of this in the whole discussion. There is a need to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, and that is urgent. So that makes building low carbon energy systems imperative and urgent also. But low carbon energy systems also creates industrial competitiveness opportunities, especially for the less developed countries where they don't have existing energy systems that are optimal in supplying their energy needs. So the low carbon energy systems, because of its disaggregated nature, especially for renewable energy options, provides an opportunity for smaller scale disaggregated energy options that entrepreneurs can get into, and that can increase industrial competitiveness of lower income economies. And also high income economies that take opportunities of this in developing technologies for transfer and sharing in some of these countries. And this is what I regard as a third industrial revolution. I don't think that the greatest industrial breakthrough of the world we are living in now will consist in extending the high carbon energy options, because that is finite, and from all the models is, even though there's no certainty about when it will finish, there's certainty that this is finite. But also the models that has been, and scenarios from the IPCC reports do show that the technical, global technical potential of low carbon technologies will not limit its continued growth. Basically, we have enough of options to continue to expand as much as the models could see at the moment. Therefore, the opportunities for innovation becomes very huge in this area. And I'm very glad to hear the introductions. I missed the first meeting about the intentions of this particular network to use the expertise of the UK experts to address the needs of those who need it most. And that is not philanthropy. That, for me, is simply being wise enough to see where the market is and where you can apply your science, your technologies, your innovations in order to be able to make profit. Sorry, I'm an economist. So that is, I think that this network and its objectives are really well placed and couldn't be timed better, because it could be at the forefront of what I'm calling the third industrial revolution. But another thing I see as a great benefit is that the known resource potentials for low carbon energy options, this is just for renewable energy options, are huge and largely inexhaustible at the moment. And if you look at those graphs, you can find that both developed and developing countries are not really taking up to, say, even 50% currently of what the potentials are. Solar energy, for instance, for the EU supergrid, this thing being done in the Sahara Desert and so on. What's the name of this big project? The Desertec project. Actually, you can supply most of the energy needs of both continents through that project alone, if that is done very well. And these are opportunities that has been laying waste because of harnessing energy from high fossil fuel, high greenhouse gas emitting options. And so is the issues about regional hydropower technical potential, and this is from the IPCC reports. So these are tested, really peer-reviewed, and as much as possible, even if one is an IPCC skeptic, I think it is rigorously done. So it's science I can depend on. So again, annual wind power capacity additions by countries is also the same. We have huge potentials that are not being harnessed. And collectively, the developing countries that are the places where we have low energy access, we have the markets for expansion, collectively, as at 2011, when this report was done, these countries host only 53% of the global renewable energy electricity generation capacity. So there's a lot of markets out there that can actually be harnessed. I'm just highlighting for annual wind power capacity additions here. For Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East, and the Pacific, it's just like nowhere in the map there, which means the potentials are yet to be exploited. So whether a scientist, an energy entrepreneur, this is the place to really go and find partnerships in order to be able to make best use of your skills. And the market is growing. The market for renewable energy options, for low carbon energy options, the awareness is also growing. And because of that, deployment of low carbon energy technologies has increased rapidly in recent years. This again is a quote from the IPCC report, the SREN report. Of the approximate 300 gigawatts of new electricity generated capacity added globally over the past 2 years, that 2 years was in 2008 to 2009, 140 gigawatts came from renewable energy additions only. So that is saying how this area is really a booming market. It's growing, starting and growing so much, and it's very timely that this network is trying to look into it. But in addition to all these other benefits that could be talked about, there are so many co-benefits that cannot really be, I can't list all of them. I've just tried to list some of them here. If implemented properly, it can also develop social and economic development through increased energy access, and we all know, as has been quoted for us, billions of people who don't have access. And through that increasing energy access, we are also helping to achieve other sustainable development goals, improving human well-being, health, and other things. Increasing security, energy security, is also something that even the global community has begun to experience. When the price hikes in fossil fuels comes in, everybody will be panicking in how to be able to bolster those shocks to the economy. So, but because of the disaggregated nature of renewable energy options, then that helps to diversify the energy portfolio. And even when there's price hikes in one, you can also rely on the other instead of complete reliance on fossil fuels. It also would help to reduce the negative impacts on the environment and health of human beings of using energy. The first speaker talked about the number of people who are using biomass energy, and we all know that this is not good for the lungs and so on, for cooking and so on. And this is happening in developing countries where the health infrastructure is also not very robust. So lots of unrecorded deaths happen due to these kinds of things. So doing this is also addressing the sustainable development goals that was reached in Rio. And also it will help to avoid complete lock-in to the high carbon technologies, which it has been the current paradigm of developing energy infrastructure and energy systems. And also helping to leverage climate finance for development projects and poverty reduction. For most developing countries, especially in Africa, in all the climate dialogues and the discussions about transitions to low carbon pathways, this is always the first point that most politicians think about. How can we utilize the opportunities that there are, huge opportunities for low carbon for climate finance, to be able to address our development goals sustainably. That way you are building a climate resilient economy, but you are also addressing your social, your economic and environmental needs. And also the IPCC report shows that these things also help in job creation, quite a lot of job creation. I didn't go into bring in the data here because I see in the presentations there's more that's going to come. Just to show how huge the markets are for Africa, as at 2010, we still have only 22.7% of rural electrification coverage. So you have huge populations that are hungry for energy and for services in that area. So there is in so many other places, not only in Africa. But maximizing these benefits depends on the specific type of technology that we're using, the management of that technology, including how it is transferred, the technology transfer mechanisms that is used, and also the site characteristics of the associated low carbon technology and low carbon systems that we are speaking about. Then let me look at some of the barriers of low carbon technologies. First, it is heterogeneous, and because of its heterogeneity, it is difficult to actually have a one-size-fits-all model for whether technology transfer, management of the system, and even the energy system in itself. So that creates some policy challenges that needs to be overcome. Again, all the models still show that the levelized cost of energy for most renewable options and low carbon options is still currently higher than the prices for other sources of energy. So that's an issue. But again, the same models do show that in various settings, depending on the conditions in the countries and the localities we are working in, that renewable energy is already becoming economically competitive. And I'm going to come back to that. Now, there are huge institutional and policy barriers that we need to think through and be able to get over in terms of the nature of the industry that already exists, the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure that already exists, the regulation of the energy system that is already there. So this differs from country to country, and finding solutions will depend on the particular countries and contexts also. Market failure is a typical culprit for some of all these environmental issues, so including the non-internalization of environmental and health costs where applicable is also there. Lack of general information and access to data is something also which you will find increasingly when you want to step out of the UK and work in developing countries in these issues, because most of the countries don't have the data, they don't collect it, they don't have the capacity and the systems to collect those data. So that's another thing that needs to be looked into. Endogenous technical and knowledge capacity, even to use and maintain these facilities when put in place in their countries, is also there, and that has implications for the types and nature of technology transfer and the innovation pathways that should be promoted in addressing those challenges. But there are also societal and personal values that affect the perceptions about low carbon energy systems. And as I have mentioned, the prevailing climate technology transfer models precludes what I call full socialization of low carbon energy technologies. In case now, you mentioned also when you were talking of this, the origin is UK experts having an interest in reaching out to help the developing countries address their energy problems. But I hope the UK experts will also know that there's a wealth of experience of both the experts in those developing countries and the people living in those countries on how these things work in their countries. And I'm very happy you said it's about building collaborations and partnerships, not creating solutions and finding ways of transferring them to these countries. So that will be a major issue. This is just, again, about the levelized costs, because this is one thing that politicians will always come back to, but it's a nuanced discussion, because the levelized cost that we computed from the SREN report does not take into account the full externalities of the other energy options, because we don't have data for them as yet. But even if you start looking at the price variabilities and the increment in the prices of the high carbon energy options, on the right there, you will see the one, this is for fossil fuel. As at the time I prepared this slide, you can see how daily increment in the price of crude over that year when I did this slide, which was last year. You can find it's going up very significantly. If you do the same for renewable energy options and low carbon technologies, it's actually going down instead of going up. So that's another thing that needs to be looked into. And this is in logarithmic scale. The cost of most renewable energy technologies, it has declined. And it's expected that as technologies improve and innovations continue in that area and policy environments become more favorable, including the IPF and technology transfer issues are improved in that area, that these prices are going to continue to go down. So again, wearing my economic hat, it would be a better option to invest in something that is becoming cheaper than to invest in something that is becoming more and more expensive. Now, the policy environment, we have a lot of issues if we are going to move out into the developing countries. You see Africa in that map, the other side, is blank as usual, and many other countries where you don't have any policies whatsoever that will help your technology transfer, your technology deployment and adoption and use in these renewables and low carbon areas. So then in that case, policy analysis and policy support to these countries in order to develop an environment, create an environment for your interventions to yield fruits would be a useful thing to do. But having said that, over the years we have seen a big increment in policy interest and deployment of renewables, and that is in this column of this graph. Let me talk briefly about the prevailing technology transfer models. You know, traditionally, we have always thought about technology transfer as moving innovative technologies and new techniques and equipment, or even resources and practices from one place to the other, which means you developed it somewhere and then you move it to the other place. And this completely ignores the social, the economic, the cultural nuances of the places, of the end users. And because of that, the technology adoption rates has always been very minimal, even in agriculture, where everybody will presume every hungry person wants food. But still, technologies that will help agricultural productivity are not adopted very significantly in many developing countries because of this kind of model that we have been using. So we need to move towards not only transferring the knowledge and transferring the skills, but actually building the skills and the knowledge of the people that are going to be receiving these technologies. And for me, that becomes a systemic process. Instead of a one-way process, it becomes a systemic process of co-production and sharing of knowledge, experiences and skills, also equipment amongst technology producers and users within and between countries. And in doing that, we help to build endogenous capacity. That's a very good schema of this that I think Rob has and Dave has in their book on why technology transfer has not worked so far. Because we are building, we are transferring the skills, we are transferring the knowledge, but we're actually not building national systems of innovation in the place that we're transferring it to, and the endogenous capacities of the people are ignored. And unfortunately, even in the climate technology options that we have, all the efforts that UNFCCC is making and all the bilateral and multilateral interventions that has been made still uses that old model in many ways. And because of that, what we find, this is about CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism. We find that countries that are not well positioned to be able to receive such technologies are still not receiving them. I'm not one of the designers of those mechanisms, but I'm almost sure that they did not design this for China. They designed it for developing countries, their next two countries. But everything is gone to China, almost 73%, 71 point something percent as at this thing. So the marginalized, the poor, are not benefiting from these things because of we are still using the old model of develop, transfer, and all these mechanisms. The type of technologies that are also being transferred is also skewed to special technologies that are needed by those people and that creates profit for the developers of the technology that is large scale and easy to develop and transfer because it's just a business that you develop the technology, you transfer it. And this, we see this in health, so that the diseases of the poor are hardly, we don't have enough drugs for the diseases of the poor, vaccines for the diseases of the poor, because it's not competitive, it's not, they don't have purchasing power. And then if we did the same on low carbon energy transfer, technology transfer, we'll get nowhere, because the easiest place to adopt these technologies are in place by the people who don't have technologies already. It's more difficult to change the EU supergrid or the energy system in the UK than it is to do something in Nigeria or in Kenya, something like that. So we need to think about that. What about its link to sustainable development? I thought this doesn't need too much of discussion because economic development generally is strongly correlated with increasing energy use. If you look at all the models, you'll find the same. And also with increasing economic growth, the same thing. But the problem is that it also has an equivalent rise in greenhouse gas emissions. So low carbon energy technologies will help to decouple this correlation, because no one is saying we should stop growth, we're actually saying we should grow better, the quality of growth, so that the footprint of the growth reduces. So low carbon energy technologies seem to be the only way to actually try to do this. So what do I mean by decoupling? I would like to see human well-being increasing. I would like to see economic activity and GDP growth also rising, but we reduce the amount of resources we use in order to achieve that. And that is what it will be called, it's called resource decoupling. But even further, we reduce the environmental impacts of that growth, and that will be impact decoupling. And if we do that, we'll be able to continue or to grow our economies without actually creating problems. Is this feasible? Yes. This one is from the Netherlands. And it didn't happen out of deliberate policy. It only happened out of accumulating technological improvements and efficiency in the system. And you can see GDP value added growing. Carbon dioxide emission is going down, and the same thing with the other dangerous emissions. And we have the same kind of models in many developed countries, OECD countries, US, and so on. This is happening unwittingly, not proactively looked for. But then, if we try to make policies for that, it will even be better. Under favorable conditions, cost savings is also possible in comparison with the high carbon emitting energy systems. In particular, for remote areas in poor rural communities that lack access to central energy systems already. So costs associated with energy imports can often be reduced through the deployment of domestic renewable energy technologies. And these are very competitive in many ways. This is just an example that can be done in other things. What do we need to look at for the transition pathways? Let's look at the starting points. The starting points are heterogeneous and different, and so are the pathways. So there will be no one-size-fits-all. Prevailing politics and power brokers, the politics of power in many places, and also especially within the energy systems, is also very strong. And we need to look at it both at the local, national, and global scales. And availability and access to relevant technology is another important thing that we need to look at critically, and endogenous knowledge base and technical skills. Also, we need to look at it. There are so many things that needs to be looked at. I just thought of providing a table on things that could be starting points for discussions. One, the characteristics of the technology in place. Let me just use an example. The UK scientists has developed the technology, and they now want to get it into Africa for use. What is that technology? What are the characteristics? And how will this influence the scale of integration that is required? That will even define which country that you should be going to in the first place. Existing energy supply systems and end-use sectors and technological feasibility also is another critical analysis that needs to be done, because integrating your low carbon energy technologies in these supply systems and then end-use sectors can accelerate the rate of technological feasibility. But the result will depend on so many other challenges that are already defined by what you find in place in those places. Do they have already low carbon energy technologies in those countries? As the current share of low carbon energy technologies sorry, within the system. Can I get water, please? Then again, we need to think about the fact that there are multiple transition pathways, and not think that what works in the UK will work in Kenya or in Rwanda. But even at that, after considering all this, that system must be adaptive and flexible, ready to change as we learn how the people are coping with the technology, becoming part of it, basically social learning as we go out into the field. And we also keep in mind that the costs are variable depending on different things, the politics of the place, the power brokers there, the availability of the resource for development of those technologies. There are so many things that needs to be considered. So as the infrastructure and energy systems develop, in spite of all these complexities there may be, there are few, if any, fundamental technological limits to integrating a portfolio of low carbon technologies to meet the majority share of energy demands in many locations. A statement from an IPCC report, but the actual rate of integration and the resulting share of low carbon technologies will be influenced by factors such as costs, policies, environmental issues, social aspects, and so on. So basically, this presents where there's no technological limits. The technical capacity is huge, there are no limits. The demand is huge and growing. So this is really a very good place to be and to try and invest. What are the policy options that one may think about going forward? Investments in the relevant scale, science, technology, and innovation in the priority sectors that we want to intervene in. Fiscal incentives at the country levels. So the countries you are going into, do they have those incentives that will help the adoption and deployment of these technologies? What are the regulations that are there, both at the national and global levels? Diversification of the energy portfolio is always the best option, especially going to a developing country, because most of them, like Ghana, that's just discovering oil. When you come and start talking low carbon development options, they will say, please get out of the door. We need to harness this resource now and get money, because that's what we need. So it's actually about diversifying the options, not actually either or stopping the other one. How do we present the communication about this, the low carbon technology options and the low carbon energy systems? It's very crucial, because in the whole climate dialogue, it's like a conflicting thing with development. And that's how it's been continually put. For us in Africa, we are now working with the African Union, and the slogan is development first. So how this is going to help us deliver development is the most important discussion that policymakers want to look into. So branding of our communication so that it's not at loggerheads with development is very, very important. But we need also structural shifts in priority areas, basically gradually moving away from the high carbon energy carriers, improving demand and supply side efficiencies. There are huge inefficiencies in the both demand and supply sides in many countries. Investing in relevant R&D for technology development and deployment, and also changing behaviors. There are so many surplus consumption of energy that we could do without. Concluding remarks. My thoughts that monetizing the external cost of energy supply, whichever one it is, whether it's low carbon energy or high carbon energy, will help to improve the relative competitiveness of low carbon energy technologies. Because the figures now being branded about from our SREN report, the IPCC SREN report, does not internalize the full costs of high carbon energy. And then it says renewable energy options, the levelized cost is higher than the other one. But we don't really know, we don't have the full cost. So we need to do research in terms of how we can internalize these externalities so that we'll be able to compare apples with apples instead of apples with oranges. A transition to low carbon energy or low greenhouse gas economy with a higher rate of low carbon energy would imply increasing investments in technology and infrastructure development, deployment, and diffusion. That is very key in moving this forward. But again, public research and investment can only work if we have favorable policies in place. So an intervention that this network also need to do in developing countries is encouraging and supporting them to have the necessary policies so that your research and development investments will work. So if you're looking for partners to do a project and they just do a research and give you the research results without actually engaging policy think tanks in that country to be able, or in the continent, to be able to help take forward this to create policy environments to make it work. You've just done another good piece of research with a good piece of publication, journal articles, produce more professors, and increase poverty. Or at least increase the divide, because the professor's income will increase and the other people will remember that. Yeah. The flexibility to adjust as technologies, markets, and other factors evolve is very important. So it's not a fixed model. So we have to continue to learn with the society, with the people, and continue to evolve these systems as much as possible. And again, as I've mentioned, the current technology transfer mechanisms could be improved if more emphasis is placed on socio-technological transitions rather than technology transfer, helping societies to transit from a lower crude technology platform to a more efficient technology platform would be very useful. And that will involve a lot of other things, which I already documented in a book that is published recently. So I'm not going to repeat them here. So if you want the book, you can ask my colleague there. He'll give you one. But I think it's at a price. Okay. So what are the research gaps that we could try and look into? Technical and institutional challenges, and also the cost of integrating all these diverse low-carbon energy technologies into existing energy systems and markets. A lot has been done, but still more needs to be done in this area, especially in developing countries. Comprehensive assessments of social, economic, and environmental costs and benefits for low-carbon energy technologies is also very necessary, it's very important. Understanding the political economy of low-carbon energy access at the national, regional, and global scales is very key. I just heard now that the energy minister in Nigeria has resigned because of these political economy issues of the energy sector. There's a lot of lobby groups, a lot of power brokers that at all levels that actually influences these transitions. So it's not that people don't want to transit, it's actually those who are making big cuts from oil would not want the transition, and that happens. Developing suitable models for technology and knowledge sharing between countries is very important, and here the University of Sussex is already developing what I consider a very good option that could be considered going forward. Harnessing opportunities for pro-poor innovations to meet the energy needs of the poor and marginalized is very important. Not to make money only, but actually to also serve the needs of these poor people. Because if I looked at the energy costs in different countries, and I find that Africa is paying more than any other country. And this is one of the poorest continents. So how are we actually trying to make the poor have access to energy if we're giving it to them at an unaffordable price? This is something that needs to be think about. And that's where I would end my talk, and I would be happy to take questions, and sorry if it's completely out of point. Thank you.